Dabren.
And I'm Megan.
And
we are the Rooted Readers. And we are back with another book reaction. This time, Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. Backstory about this book. I heard about the book while watching a podcast with, not a podcast, they should have a podcast, while watching a live of Nick Stone and Angie Thomas. And they were saying that was their favorite book. Typically with the YA books, I try to read them first because some of them have some inappropriate material, inappropriate for a 12-year-old, and some of them are just kind of too deep for, him to experience right now. He'll have a lot of questions. So I typically try to read the book before him, which is why I told him not to read this book yet. One night sent Dabren to bed, and we thought he was asleep, and he came out and laid the book on a table and was like, oh, I just finished this. And you can't really get mad at your child for reading a book, but I didn't know. I heard that it was kind of like it was a deep book. I wanted to read to know what he was getting himself into. And then I read the book one night with his dad. And I read the book while I was sitting near his dad, and I just kept saying, I cannot believe he read this book and then went to sleep with how close this book is to a situation that recently happened. So last year we lost Dabren's uncle, my brother-in-law, to gun violence. And the book was it had all of those emotions that Dave's dad was feeling, and I saw some of the emotions that Dave felt after he found out about everything, and just even seeing the mom's feelings, and we talked about generational cycles in the last video, and we talked about Dear Justice, and this book was literally, if you wanted a definition of generational cycles, this was the biggest example of generational cycles and how they affect especially our Black communities. So
I think I want to tell y'all about the book. So basically Will, which is the main character, his brother is shot dead, and basically he already knows the rules. And the rules are like, let me see, the rules are no crying no matter what, no snitching no matter what, and revenge due no matter what. So it's kind of like, man, at that age to know, like, this is what happens. Like, and when they heard the shots, they were like, okay, this is normal drill, do the drill, just duck and make sure you don't get shot. And I was just like, man, like, how do they just go day to day knowing this can happen to them or to some of their friends? Like, and I'm just like, man, like, it was crazy.
So one of the discussion questions in the back was, when was the first time you heard about these rules? So have you ever heard these rules?
Have I ever heard these rules? Actually, I've never heard these rules really, because like, I never grew up in that type of environment. But knowing like this, I think my dad will probably know this because he kind of grew up in that environment. So I feel like I was like kind of, the whole time I was kind of wondering, is this what dad, or these the same rules that dad did?
That's what's interesting. When I saw the question, it made me think back to when Dad and I were in 11th grade, and that's when I first learned about these rules, because Dad was shot and was very similar, defending someone from his neighborhood, and was shot. And then I know we sat down together and we had to write like a victim report, and I just remember sitting there and like, okay, what was his name and what was his, and he was just like, for what, like what, like, and then even going up there was like, I wanted these emotions from him, and I wanted him, like, I wanted to know exactly what he was feeling, and it was just like, this is what happens.
I remember asking Dad the entire, like, what happened, because all I knew was, oh, Dad got shot, and like, that was it. But then one night I asked him, and he was just like, oh, it happened, I was like this. He was just giving me like bland answers.
It just seems really. He made it seem like it was normal.
Yeah,
like this was
it was
something
just like
that was just gonna happen because I live in the neighborhood that I live in, and my first time hearing about the revenge, and I'll never forget this because it like scared the heck out of me because I didn't grow up where Dad grew up. I went to the same schools that he went to, but I didn't grow up the same way. And I remember I went out of town when Dad got shot. So I went out of town the day after he got shot. So I was able to see him in the hospital, and then I came back a week later. And so when I came back, I think he had just gotten out the hospital, or yeah, he had been out the hospital for 2 days. So the older people thought like, okay, that's enough time. And I just remember him receiving calls like, okay, what are we gonna do about it? Like, I'm ready, I'll go do it for you, or when are we gonna go do it? It was like this pressing thing, like we need to go handle this situation, and these people can't get away with it. And in my head, like the only thing I've ever known is, you know, if somebody does something to you, call the police handles everything. Like I said with the police report, it was like, no, like I don't need to say their names. And then when those people called, it was like, this is what we do. And I just remember like crying and like having a conversation with your dad, like, I don't want to experience this again. Because, you know, I've watched the news long enough to know that, okay, if you get revenge, then more revenge comes, and there's just a continuous cycle. But they really stuck to those rules, and people didn't really understand why and I want to say, I can't say completely, but I think it was like me, like basically begging him, like, don't do this. Like, everybody around you has gone through enough because of you getting shot. Like, that was scary enough. Like, let's just be grateful that you're alive and not. And so Dad made the choice that that the main character was faced with, to not retaliate. And I don't know if he completely felt that was the right decision, because those rules are embedded in you when you're like, from the time you're little, like, because that's what you do.
It was like the uncle told the dad told the oldest brother told the youngest brother, and I'm just like, man, if mom reads this, she's gonna do like generational cycles, like,
yeah. And I think we've seen it even with Robert getting shot. Like, that was one of the hardest things, I think, for Dad, is knowing like Dad is in a different headspace now because he has 2 kids, and you know, like, we have built this life and we've done all these different things. And I think for once he had to say, okay, do I follow the rules? Like, I see him battle with that on a regular basis. Like, I don't think it's like a battle that's done, but I see him on a regular basis, like, battling with, I haven't followed the rules. He knows why he shouldn't follow the rules, but at the same time, it's like, he's battling with the fact that something happened and I did nothing about it. Even though he can walk you through like all these, he can walk you through the fact that like, this is not, and he does a very good job of telling his friends like basically what happened in this book without all of the different people popping up. Like, he does a very good job of explaining like, hey, y'all saw what happened to so and so, y'all saw what happened to this, like, this is how this goes, this is not the right thing to do, like, we need to stay focused. But I still, if that's embedded in you from the time you were a kid and you've seen everyone around you follow these rules, a lot of his relatives have went to jail or have passed away, and he's seen everybody following these rules, it's very difficult not to just, those are the rules and let's stick to it. That's why when reading and seeing the main character go through that, I was just like it gave me insight as to why that's so difficult.
And there was so much that I could relate to the book, but like, one of the things that I couldn't relate to was because I've only experienced one loss by uncle. But to know like once I started catching on, like 7, 6, 5, like the metaphor of it going down, like, I don't think it's like a metaphor, but like every time the elevator goes down, a new person comes in. And I'm like, man, every single time they know that person is dead. And I'm like, man, to know that all of these people that he loved, that he cared for, are gone. It's just like, man, like to.
I didn't even catch that. I didn't catch
because every time Buck was the first person to come on, and he was like, I'm dead, but I'm alive. And so every time he struck a match, somebody else that he lost came on, like Danny.
I didn't catch that.
Like it was just, and I was like, man, to know that after this chapter, well, not chapter, but like after this story, after this level, another person's gonna come on, and that person isn't alive though. And I was like, what's gonna happen when he gets to the lowest floor, when he actually gets to the lobby? Like, I was like, what's gonna happen? Is like everybody that he's lost gonna come down there? I'm like, it was like so many questions.
And that's what kids are faced with, and not kids, adults in general are faced with every day. Like, from whether it's a kid who's following a cycle of selling drugs or the kid who's following the rules, like, they're faced with that decision. Like, am I going to continue to do what I've been taught is acceptable? Like, that's what they're faced with every day. And it's like, reading a book gave me a better understanding. And it's just like as an educator, counselor, as a mom, like, how do we stop this from even being like an option, or like something a kid at his age even has to consider? Because Robert isn't, like, whether you don't realize it, but Robert isn't the first funeral of a close loved one or relative that you've been to. Like, there was a minute where, from the time I've met Dad, like, I feel like at least, like, minimum at least 2 people were lost, like, every year. And we've been together for 14 years now. So imagine, like, and that's just the ones that I know. That's just from 14. If you sit down and have a conversation with him, he's like, oh yeah, so-and-so's uncle got killed. And it seems so normal, and it's so scary that not only are these rules normal, but that violence and, like, that hate for one another is normal.
So one of the things that really grabbed me at points, and like whenever people walked on the elevator, was that they knew that they were going, like, the people that were. So something that really grabbed me in this book was that, like, the dad and the uncle and everybody were. Alright, so
So I think this is a true example of why him making that choice was so important, because I don't think people get to see this side of things. I don't think, even when you're following the rules because of retaliation, like, people don't get to see this side. People don't get to see, they're thinking about their personal hurt, but they don't think about the hurt that they're causing to everybody else. They don't think about, and according to the rules, you aren't allowed to feel that hurt. So I I can't say that I'm happy for the emotion, but I know that all these cycles that have been going on in dad's family, dad's neighborhood, all this, like, I have faith that they will stop with you, and that because you are not following the rules, that you understand the pain and all that comes with it, and you'll make some other choices, right? Because some people get so caught up in just following the rules, like even with dad. Like, I don't think the person who shot dad was this crazy, terrible person, but he was somebody who felt like, okay, if somebody defends somebody else and they do something to me, I should in turn do something to them. And so since I feel hurt, I should go cause hurt to someone else.
And it really was like man, like, to know, like, everything inside of Will's head, like what's going on in his head right now. And I'm just like, the way, like, I'm not even sure if he was like even okay, like, because it kind of reminded me of Quayle, because I remember talking with you, right, and I was like, I don't know if Quaylen is alright, because, like, he just lost his dad and he's not really acting like anything happened, and I'm just like, I think he's, like, not okay really. But you told me, like, everybody has a different like way of handling things, and that kind of, like, made me like, okay, like, maybe that's what's kind of happening with Will. Like, instead of focusing on the emotion, maybe focus, like, revenge is something for him to focus on instead of the emotion. Like, I feel like that.
Because for some people, because that's the way that you're taught to handle it, some people feel that by doing that, by getting revenge, it handles it. I'm glad Jason Reynolds shows that way of handling it causes more issues, because nobody really shows that side of things. Like, so many people, like, I'm really grateful for your dad to, like, be that person for people, to say, like, dude, like, we have families, we have, moms and stuff like that are, dependent on us, because who knows who else is waiting to follow the rules. Like, there are a lot of hurt people who,
and it's like a lot of the time, like, I hear everybody, like, one time I was at my dad's brother's house with dad, and they were talking about, like, what happened, what they were feeling, and I was like, and they were like, I think this person did it because of this, and I think this person, and I was like, man, like, that book kind of made me, like, say, like, man, I don't really want them to find out who this person is sometimes. Because I was like, at one point, I'm like, yes, please find the person who killed my uncle, because, like, it's like I wanted justice for him. But then reading that, I'm like, this is probably what Dad lived through every day. Well, not every day, but, like, this is probably what Dad lived through. And I'm like, if he finds out who killed Robert, it might know, okay, this is who he is, and I'm gonna find out, like, I'm gonna get revenge. And I'm like, it makes me not want them to find out who did it, because, like, I don't want them to have an even better reason to get revenge, because then that can cause them, the people who cared about the people that killed Robert, like, it's a long line, because it just goes on and on. Because, like, if someone gets killed, their loved ones are gonna want revenge, and then they're gonna get revenge, and then they're gonna get revenge, and it's gonna be a whole cycle of revenge that's gonna lose so many loved ones. And I feel like that's, like, not, like, I hear, like, violence is never the answer, and I feel like that's, like, one of the major things that I want to scream into the world sometimes, because, like, it isn't the answer. It's never the answer, really, because, like, okay, yeah, you lost a loved one, but like still, how are you gonna? What do you want to lose? I know you probably don't care for him at all, but like still, you're still like that's one of the things that I wrote because you make me like well not make me, but I have to write review questions.
Question.
I have to write discussion questions. I was like, it was like one of what can you relate to this or something, and I was like, well, no, what did this book make you think of? And I was like, this book really made me want to think like what was Robert's killer's reason? Why did like I probably not most likely definitely not, but like did Robert do something to make him want to do that? And it was like it made me want to think like what was Robert feeling? What was everybody in that whole situation?
Or could it have been one of those situations like with one of the characters where they got the wrong person, where that hurt guided them to the wrong person, and nobody ever knows, it's just people react because these are the rules. And I pray and hope that is one of your missions, to scream that into the world, because I think even now, like even your dad's friends look at somebody who's a product of your dad trying to be completely different just because you were born, decided like I'm gonna be a completely different person. I'm gonna try to be a different role model than the people around me because I want this little boy to be completely different from everybody else. So now because of what dad did, his friends look at you like, dang, we don't all have to be the same. Right? Like sometimes they don't even look like dad is different from them, but they still know, what has been instilled in dad, and like, that stuff is in him. They've known his past and all that kind of stuff. So they look at you and say like, dang, like you could have somebody, you can come from this situation and you could raise somebody to be honorable and talented and intelligent, and you can just instill all this love into somebody and make them feel like hate and violence is not the answer. Like his friends are looking at you, 30-something-year-old males are looking at you and saying like, okay, like there's something different.
And like I see like on the news like, okay, like the George Floyd was killed. Now everybody is burning cop cars, doing all of this violent things. And I'm like, why? At the end of the day, like I know that wasn't right at all. Now that should never happen. Like that's racism. But at the end of the day, like none of this violence is gonna fix what happened. Like none of the violence.
I have mixed feelings on the protest and violence. I will say, I have mixed feelings because it's a difference between like, how do I word that? I think it's a difference between there is a whole system of people who have been taught to hate each other, not by each other, but they've been taught to hate each other. They've been taught to by people who don't look like us, who've been taught to, fight for scraps and things like that, who just don't know, right? And then there's a difference between people who actually know better and do things to this group of people who are already being pushed down on a regular basis and just say, oh, I know better, but I'm going to kill you just because. That's very frustrating. Like that's why we took you guys to the protest, because I wanted y'all to see how upset people are, because I'm upset. Like as a black mom, knowing that like you could get pulled over and not make it home, that is frustrating to me. That's not something that I should ever, like somebody who's put on the streets to keep peace, but they're causing death. Like that's very frustrating to me to know that like they have that much power. They get off with all of these things on a regular basis. So I can't get mad at those people. I honestly can't say that I'm upset with their anger. I'm not upset with how they express their anger, just because for so long we've been taught as women, don't be the angry black woman, or when we're around a certain group, okay, let's behave this way, so it's just, I think that frustration and the world showing that frustration has changed so much in a short amount of time, and I hope it continues to change. And sometimes with stuff like that, it takes that drastic, because it's a difference between taking somebody's child and father and uncle and brother for a crime that he could have went to jail for, versus somebody who just has been taught these rules and in turn take lives because these are the rules that we were brought up on. They need I think our communities need mentality changes. The police are trained exactly how to get somebody in the car, how to de-escalate a situation. Sometimes they choose not to use those tactics. If these are the rules that you've been given, and nobody has tried to come in and say, hey, let's try this, or let's try to give you some exposure to some things that y'all can actually be, and so y'all don't have to fight each other for these little positions in the neighborhood, like it would probably be different,
And one of the things that I could definitely relate to as well was how Jason Reynolds explained Will's pain and the sadness, and I'm gonna read that part. So it says, the sadness is just so hard to explain. Imagine waking up and someone, a stranger, got you strapped down, got pliers shoved into your mouth, gripping a tooth somewhere in the back, one of the big important ones, and rips it out. And it made me my skin crawled at that. And I just kept on thinking, I just kept on reimagining that in my head, the
and
pain.
that, when I read it, I thought about going into so when I got the call about Robert, I went into your room and I sat there for a minute and I was like, I gotta go tell him. And I felt like I did that same thing that you just read. I feel like I did that to you. And then in turn, Dad called and I had to tell him, and I feel like I did that to him. And it's like those, just knowing that I was the person that was about to cause y'all all this pain. My words were gonna cause all this pain was the worst feeling ever. Just to know that I tell Dad all the time, I'm sorry. I know I'm not the person that did it, but it's still to have to hear that from my voice was so painful. Because I know that's something that for the rest of his life he'll remember. I know you've talked about it several times. That's for the rest of your life you'll remember.
So another thing that stood out was the way it was written. It wasn't just a regular book with a block of words. It was actually like poem, but it's free verse. So it's different words. It kind of reminded me of Stamped, because some of the words are bigger, or some of the words are smaller, and it kind of reminded me of Stamped, but
it was hard for me not to. So there were parts where things were getting more intense, and I wanted to skip ahead to see who was coming next, or I don't know, I think there was a part where he described a puff of smoke, and he's wondering, and it's oh my gosh, and it builds up the intensity, and it's I wanted to go all the way to the bottom and see first,
because you only get this small little caption of words, and I'm da 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 da. Okay, done reading that part. Let's come on, and I'm just who did it? So because I remember skipping through, and I was I gotta read what I just skipped, because I'm what just happened? There's so many small parts that I probably missed one of the most important things. So I was let me go back and read that. And it was so crazy, because this is one of the first books that I finished in that amount of time.
Yeah,
I finished it in like two to 1 hour.
Supposed to be sleeping.
And it's supposed to take me like a week to finish, but I was like, I knew I wasn't.
Yeah, I finished it pretty fast.
I knew I wasn't gonna be able to just stop.
Yeah, I definitely didn't. I think Dad and I normally go outside and sit with each other at nighttime. Like, that's our time to like get away and sit out with each other and talk. And I was just like, I'm sorry, like, this book is too good. I can't put it down. I read it. I pretty much finished. I think I woke up and had about like 10 pages left when I finished reading it. But yeah, this one, it's one of the best books I've read. But it was tough,
it was
especially just being how close it was to so many situations, not even, you know, the ones in our family, but just so many that we've heard in the Black community. Like, it was very close to home. I'm not sure exactly. So many people need to read this book. I even think that, because I used to have so many kids that would come in and, you know, like they lost a dad or a brother or a cousin to gun violence, and it was like they were so angry and the teachers didn't understand that anger. And it's like, as a 6th grader, when you know, like, unfortunately there are kids who know these rules in the 5th and 6th grade. 5th and 6th graders that I talked to knew these rules, and they were on the same thing as Will at 5th and 6th grade.
And I feel like, oh yeah, so I think that, like, I wish I could buy so many copies of this book and just hand them out to, like, not even like sell them, like hand them out to like the Wills and like where, like, these types of environments, because I'm like, so many people are like this and they don't get to tell their side.
Well, you aren't really not even tell their side. Like, you aren't allowed to cry. So you're not encouraged to talk about it. You follow the rules. You don't cry, you don't snitch, and you get revenge. You never have the time to sit down and talk about the reason that we're doing all these things is because of rule number 1. I'm not actually crying and dealing with the issue.
And I feel like if they like read this book, not that it will encourage them to show those emotions, but like it will like help them cope with them.
Yeah.
So,
or just letting them know that, like, all those thoughts, because everything that Will was experiencing, I had, which Dad breaks the rules with me. So he's able, like, he's found somebody who he's able to actually cry and actually talk to about these things. And I think that helps him a lot. But like, there are some Wills of the world who don't have anybody that they can go talk to or cry to or express those feelings, and they bottle them up, and then it's easier to follow the rules than to talk about it or to actually cry it out, because that's not encouraged.
And that was one of the craziest things. Like, speaking of crying, like, that was the first time I ever heard Dad cry. We were on the phone, we were standing outside of Yaya's house, and he just broke down, and I'm just like, I was like, it's okay. I was trying to help him, but I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I've never seen him cry. Well, I've never heard him cry. And I was like, I wish I could give him a hug. Like, I was like, I wish he was standing right here by me so I could just give him a hug. And I was like, and it was just crazy to hear him cry for the first time and know that, like you said, he's been to more than 2 funerals, and to know that did he cry at those funerals?
I think I've never seen him cry in front of, I don't think at any of those funerals, any of the ones in front of friends, in front of people in his neighborhood, like, he won't do it at all. Now, if we sit down and have a conversation, then I'll see those emotions. But I'm also that person where he can bring those emotions out, and that's where I worry about, like, his friends and his other family members who don't have someone who's going to almost force those emotions out. So I don't know, I think all of this, and then even just every time I read books like this, because sometimes it feels like you're the only person. Like, I had never met anybody as young as your dad who had experienced as much as your dad, had experienced as much loss as your dad. Like, and it was so normal. It was just like,
and it made me realize, like, there's a lot of kids that are just like Will and have experienced all of this loss. And it's like, to even
or to know, I think, where is Jason Reynolds from? Jason Reynolds is obviously not from Houston.
Washington, D.C.
From Washington, D.C. And every time I read this, I'm like, dang, like, how are their stories? And that was one of the reasons we started doing the Black authors, because you weren't really relating to some of the other authors and some of the characters in the books. And it just makes me sad that, like, these are like general issues, like, in Black communities everywhere. Like, the fact that at 12 years old you live in Spring, Texas, in the suburbs, and you could relate to a book that was written about a little boy that wasn't in a suburban neighborhood. It just makes me feel like this, like, it's not just a poverty issue. Like, it's a Black community issue. Like, it's no matter how far we pull y'all away from, you know, the rough neighborhoods or anything, like, we can't take the pain that happens in those areas, because we're still connected to those areas. And we can't stop y'all from experiencing that pain, because our people are following rules that are killing us all.
So this book was very, very, very close to home, and one of my favorite things about the book, because it's kind of hard to have a favorite thing about a book like this, and one of my favorites was the detail and how they explained certain things.
Okay, so another Jason Reynolds, and Dave is one of those kids that once he gets an author that he likes, he wants to read every single book. So we will have a lot from the same authors, because that's just his thing. He wants to read everything that Nick Stone has to offer. He wants to read everything that Jason Reynolds has to offer. I think this is our last. There's one more Jason Reynolds that you haven't read, but he's not quite ready to read that one yet. But another great book by Jason Reynolds, very touching, very emotional, but it allowed us to have some conversations that we hadn't had before. Allowed him to understand Dad's emotions, and just, you know, some of the things that he's heard that he really didn't address with us. And I think it also gives him a different, because he hadn't heard of the rules, it gives him a different outlook on them. I would love to have this conversation in some of our communities where things like this happen on a regular basis, because some of our babies only know these rules. Some of our babies are raised on these rules, and even as a counselor coming into the office, I've had so many kids who have lost people to gun violence, or just any type, lost parents to jail or anything like that, and they've been told it's not okay to express that hurt and that pain, which goes deeper and deeper, and then these rules are easier to follow when you have built all of that up. I appreciate Jason Reynolds for shedding light on an issue like this and giving us something that unfortunately we can relate to. And I think I can only hope that this video helps other people who are going through the same thing say, okay, following a cycle may not be such a good idea.
And I think everybody can learn that from this book that violence isn't really the answer. That's one of the things. No, and that's all I have to say.
Yeah. So we are the Rooted Readers signing off. I finally said off.